Right, so our right to protest, enshrined in the Human Rights Act, has been under significant attack ever since Suella Braverman rammed through secondary legislation to the Public Order Act, following parliamentary defeat in trying to do that previously, using so-called Henry VIII powers to hand the police powers to deal with protesters deemed to have breached said Public Order Act by doing something serious enough to be deemed more than minor. That is literally the wording of what she sneaked into law. And we've seen the effect on protest ever since, with arbitrary arrests conducted during protests that can be attributed to pretty much anything the police on scene decide fits that vague and grossly open to interpretation wording. The opposition Labour Party of Keir Starmer opposed all of this at the time, as you can imagine. Opposing the Tories was the most politically expedient thing to be doing back then. But following the Tory government being taken to the High Court last year and being defeated over this issue, the appeal, because of course the Tories appealed it, hadn't been heard before they lost power to Starmer's Labour. But by this time Starmer had decided, well, it kind of suited him to keep it now, so he went ahead with the Tories' appeal. Starmer's Labour going to court to follow up an appeal to save Tory legislation that the Tories had instigated. Two-faced Starmer, two-tier Keir, whatever your chosen phrase, it fits. Well, just like the blue Tories, Starmer's red Tories have lost now too. And they deserve every bit of the political damage they've earned from it now as well. Right, so the UK Court of Appeal has upheld a previous High Court ruling that declared the government's expansion of police powers to restrict protests was unlawful. That's 5 judges now across 2 cases that have all agreed it's not fit for purpose. This judgment not only reaffirms our fundamental right to peaceful assembly now, but also highlights the dangers of government overreach, as both the Tories of Rishi Sunak and what passes for Labour under Keir Starmer have had their backsides handed to them over the same thing, and the importance of judicial oversight in preserving our democratic freedoms has been made all the more abundant because of it. We've got to win against this lot, finally. It was back in 2023 that the then Home Secretary Suella Braverman sought to amend the Public Order Act by redefining serious disruption to include actions causing more than minor inconvenience. This change lowered the threshold for police intervention in protests, granted law enforcement broader discretion to impose conditions on demonstrations. Notably, Braverman introduced this amendment through secondary legislation, having failed to get it passed conventionally through Parliament some 6 months prior, bypassing the more comprehensive scrutiny of primary legislation. This manoeuvre was often referred to, because it was happening so often, to being using Henry VIII powers, because it's very much the kind of thing that he would do, a what I want to do, I will do kind of tyrannical nonsense, allowing ministers to modify existing laws without full parliamentary approval. Every time this was done, the Tories developed a bit more of a habit for doing it. It was criticised as a constitutional outrage by legal experts and civil rights groups, and absolutely rightly so in my view. But Braverman's introduction of these expanded powers faced immediate backlash from civil liberties organisations, opposition parties such as Starmer's Labour at that time, and the public, of course, and all the more so as the effects of these police powers and the abuse that followed became all the more clear. Therefore, it was the human rights group Liberty that ended up spearheading a legal challenge, with the Public Law Project acting as interveners in it, arguing that the government's actions were an overreach, were too open to interpretation, undermined the democratic process, and even more so, our human rights to protest. In May 2024, the High Court ruled in favour of Liberty, stating that the government had exceeded its authority by implementing such significant changes without proper legislative procedure, and had increased the risk of protesters being judged to have acted criminally. They also found that the government was aware that this was likely to increase the number of conditions imposed by the police by up to 50%, and that prosecutions would also increase by around 1/3, all for protesting, which we all have a right to do. The big bone of contention was that correlation between the wording of protesters being found to be doing something more than minor during a protest and the word serious in connection with whatever they'd done. The word serious is a big jump from more than minor. It's very ill-defined, impossible to standardise. But for someone who wanted protests shut down, basically, it's par for the course for someone as outspokenly hard-right and oppressive as Suella Braverman. Despite that ruling, though, the government, then still under Conservative leadership, appealed that decision. Following the general election, though, the Labour Party, led by Keir Starmer, as we know, assumed power before said appeal was heard. Surely, having opposed this legislation previously, the appeal would now be binned then, therefore save the public purse a little bit of cash. Well, of course not. This is Keir Starmer, after all. When is his word or opinion worth anything, or when does he stick to it from one moment to the next? Oh, look, I quite like this legislation now I'm in charge, especially when it comes to anti-genocide protests, pro-Gaza protests. So instead of withdrawing the appeal, the new government, the new Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, chose to continue defending the contested legislation, carried on with the appeal, therefore completely contradicting themselves. Braverman brings in appalling legislation, Labour then opposed it, the Tories took it to court and lost their case, the Tories appeal, Labour come into power, Labour decide to keep the powers and carry on with the appeal, now literally going to court to defend Tory legislation that had already been defeated once in court. Labour hate being called Red Tories, but those boots do fit them oh so well, don't they? Therefore, whilst the media was preoccupied with analysing the local election results of the night before, it was quietly sneaked out that the Court of Appeal had dismissed the Starmer government's appeal on the 2nd of May, reinforcing the High Court's decision. The judges re-emphasised that the term serious disruption inherently implies a high threshold and cannot reasonably be interpreted to mean anything more than minor, in which case adhering to proper legislative process is important. Going through the right channels is crucial. Otherwise, governments suffer embarrassing defeats in Parliament. But this is especially embarrassing for Starmer and co, because this wasn't even their legislation they were defending to begin with. They simply chose to hoist themselves by Suella Braverman's petard. There has to be oversight. The judiciary provide that if necessary, and they've done the job here. Braverman's police anti-protest powers are unlawful. Now get over it and get rid of them. The unlawful expansion of police powers had tangible consequences, and we've seen it over and over again during the last 2 years they've been around. Numerous peaceful protesters being arrested under these new regulations. Amongst them was Chris Nynham, the prominent anti-war activist who organises a lot of demos in London, who was detained during one particular peaceful demo at a wreath laying in memory of dead Gazan children. Another particularly egregious example was the police summoning to answer questions in relation to a protest he had been part of. The individual in question being Stephen Kapos, an 87-year-old Holocaust survivor who had been called in for questioning for participating in an anti-genocide march supporting Gaza. The optics of that, especially with Israel constantly comparing the Hamas attack of October 7th to the Holocaust, eh? Yeah, shows the damage done, doesn't it? These incidents highlight the scope for misuse of vaguely defined laws, as the High Court very much pointed out, and the chilling effect they can have on free expression, freedom of assembly, which of course was the idea. Liberty's persistent efforts have been instrumental in challenging and overturning this chronic legislation. And following the Court of Appeal's decision, Liberty's director Akiko Hart stated, "Today's judgment is clear, just as it was last year, that these laws should never have been made. They were a flagrant abuse of power from a government determined to shut down protesters they did not personally agree with. 5 different judges over 2 separate hearings have now ruled that serious simply cannot mean more than minor. It's therefore even more surprising that the current government chose to continue the appeal into this case and argue that wasn't the case. As a result, even more people have been needlessly funneled into the criminal system over the past 12 months through a law that should never have existed in the first place. This ruling is a huge victory for democracy and sets an important precedent that government ministers must respect the law and cannot simply step outside it to do whatever they want. The next step for the government is simple. They must accept this ruling and agree to scrap this unlawful legislation once and for all." Shamim Ahmad, the CEO of the Public Law Project, has also weighed in on this ruling with a statement, having said that Public Law Project supported liberty in the High Court and the Court of Appeal because this is a critical juncture for the UK's democracy. The former Home Secretary used statutory instruments to significantly restrict protest rights without scrutiny, despite these amendments being previously voted down by Parliament. The High Court agreed with us that this was an excessive and unlawful use of executive power. When the current government decided to appeal that decision, they missed a valuable opportunity to defend civil liberties, restore proper balance between the executive power and Parliament, and commit to making laws the right way. The Court of Appeal has now agreed with Liberty and PLP. PLP believes the public deserve better than backdoor lawmaking that allows their fundamental rights to be diminished by ministerial decree. The public deserves assurance that legislation impacting their daily lives has undergone parliamentary debate and thorough scrutiny. We trust that this decisive victory for the rule of law and parliamentary sovereignty will serve as a watershed moment for the government. These restrictive protest laws should now be permanently abandoned and Henry VIII powers relegated to the annals of history where they belong. And of course they are both absolutely 100% right. Starmer's bunch must immediately scrap this unlawful law and initiate a comprehensive review of all protest-related legislation that's been passed in recent years. We also need to see the reversal of wrongful arrests and a renewed commitment to safeguarding democratic freedoms in relation to protest, which for Starmer's lot, who seem more intent on locking up protesters than for pretty much any other crime, this is especially bad news for them. Henry VIII powers, as undemocratic as they are, must be binned off to history as well, just like the tyrant king they're named for. The Court of Appeal's ruling serves as a critical reminder the importance of checks and balances in a democratic society, and that this applies to the government as much as those they govern over. Nobody is above the law and all of that. Governmental actions have to align with legal frameworks and respect fundamental rights, otherwise we all risk seeing further erosion of them, and seeing Reform UK do so well in the local elections and knowing Farage would love to scrap the Human Rights Act entirely, protecting all manner of rights we take too often for granted. The warning signs are there, yet for too many they aren't taking any notice. As the UK moves forward, it's imperative for lawmakers to ensure that any measures affecting civil liberties undergo thorough scrutiny and public consultation, as well as the correct route through Parliament. The preservation of the right to protest is not just a legal obligation, but it is a cornerstone of a vibrant and functioning democracy, and any legislation attacking that or any of our other rights needs to end up in court each and every time to be fought back against. We got a win here, but you might not have even heard about it thanks to our awful mainstream media. The unlawful expansion of police powers to restrict protests represents a significant threat to civil liberties in the UK. The successful legal challenges mounted by Liberty and the subsequent rulings by the High Court and the Court of Appeal show that this is still a nation committed to democratic principles and the rule of law, even if our governments seem increasingly uninterested in doing so. So it is now incumbent upon Starmer's government to respect these decisions, rectify these past injustices, and ensure that the right to peaceful protest remains protected for all of us. It's very difficult to have faith in Starmer ever doing the right thing, though, isn't it? When he never acknowledges he ever gets anything wrong. It is that determination that he's always right and we are always wrong, therefore, that largely contributed to his local election drubbing, of course, and his response to being told, "We don't like what you're doing," to go even further, even faster. No wonder Labour have just recorded their worst set of local election results since records began. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as supporting the channel at the very same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.